And the Maryland Supreme Court is expected to hear arguments today that could determine the fate of Adnan Syed, whose case was made famous by the hit podcast Serial. A judge vacated his murder conviction in the 1999 death of his high school ex-girlfriend, Hae Min Lee, last year. But in March, an appeals court reinstated the conviction after finding the lower court violated the victim's family's right to attend a hearing on overturning it. ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer joins me now for more on this. Brian, this case has been a roller coaster. So what does the court need to consider to determine what happens now?
Well, Diane, I think it's a bit of a balancing act here, because on one end, you have Adnan Syed, who is, by the own prosecutor's statements, seems to not have the evidence to be able to convict him. In fact, has evidence that points to another potential suspect in this case, and that's why they vacated or erased his conviction. But because of the issue of victim's right, they reinstated it. So I think it's a balancing act between, do you allow this conviction to be maintained so that this victim can then participate meaningfully in this last hearing, or do you just finish the case and move on?
Now, Brian, a judge ruled to release Syed last year because she said prosecutors failed to turn over evidence that could have helped his trial in 2000, and that new DNA evidence could have affected the outcome. Now, the victim's family's attorney isn't debating that outright, but they're saying the rights were violated because they weren't given appropriate notice to attend the proceedings in person, and that Syed's team should have to show that evidence in court. Walk us through how these arguments land, how strong they are, and how you see this playing out.
Well, first and foremost, that's not how the criminal justice system works. I understand the Lee family's attorney wanting more out of this process, but at the heart of the criminal defense practice, you do not have to prove your innocence. It's the prosecution's burden to prove that you are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So the prosecution has come forward and said, hey, we seem to have made a mistake. We withheld evidence. There is other evidence here that suggests that he's innocent. It doesn't then become the defendant's obligation to then, I guess, prove what the prosecution has put forward as to why they're vacating this case. So that argument in of itself doesn't really make sense. The constitutional issue, and I think it's a state constitutional issue, here is about being informed and about having what's most practicable to be able to attend that hearing. Now, young Lee, the sibling of Hae Min Lee, was able to participate through Zoom and see it virtually, but was not able to participate physically. But I don't think that his right should then override a defendant's right and say, well, you have to go back to prison so you can prove your innocence.
Brian, despite his conviction being reinstated, Syed has been free since September 2022. Does that change things at all in how this case moves forward?
It changes it a little bit in the sense of just the tenor of the case. Oftentimes during an appeal, a judge will keep a defendant in prison pending the appeal or just seeing what the outcome is. This is a very strong signal from the judge saying that not only is the evidence suggesting that he is not guilty, but he does not present to be a danger to society, and there's no reason to have him locked up. This shows me, at least, that the judge is leaning very heavily towards he will not go back in prison, but I wouldn't guarantee it one way or another. But I do think it's a strong suggestion that that's the case.
Brian, we don't expect a ruling until later this year. So what happens next?
Until then, the judge will consider, I think, like I said, it's a balancing act of rights and try to maybe come up with some kind of way to not have Adnan Syed back in prison merely to have the victim's family then hear the evidence, but maybe there might be a hearing where Adnan Syed is left out of prison. He maybe comes back to a hearing where the evidence is presented at a time that the victim's family can hear. But I don't think the burden will be on him to prove these allegations that he is innocent, because again, that's not how the justice system works. The prosecution presents the evidence, they have the burden of proof, and in here, they're saying Adnan Syed does not appear to be guilty. We want to vacate this charge.
All right, ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer. Thanks, Brian.
My pleasure.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.